Could your shoes get you arrested in medieval England? What if wearing armor to Parliament was illegal? In the Middle Ages, fashion wasn't just style, it was the law. Join me as we uncover the strange and unbelievable rules that dictated clothing in medieval England. Wearing armor in Parliament. So, imagine yourself in Parliament in 1313. You might expect to see nobles, clergy, and royal officials. But what about knights in full armor? Believe it or not, that was precisely the problem King Edward II was trying to address. In that year, Edward II made wearing armor in Parliament illegal. This wasn't just a whim, it was a response to real political crisis. Edward II's reign was marked by intense baronial conflict, fueled by his unpopular rule and, crucially, towards Piers Gaveston. Powerful barons, magnates like the Earl of Lancaster, were in constant opposition. They resented Gaveston, a commoner Edward had elevated to earldom, viewing him as a usurper of their rightful place and influence. Parliament became a key stage for these power struggles. These barons often arrived with armed retinues, their own armed men, creating a climate of intimidation and potential violence. This presence of armed men undermined the very principles of parliamentary debate, where reasoned discussion should be paramount. Edward II's ban on armor in 1313 was a direct response to this volatile situation, likely fearing a coup within Parliament itself. The law, stipulated in the Statute of Westminster of 1313, declared attendees must arrive without all force and armor. This aimed to restore order and protect Parliament's integrity. While the image of knights being denied entry to Parliament might seem amusing today, the underlying principle remains relevant. The necessity of maintaining order and respect in legislative bodies is still crucial. This is why this law, in spirit, remains in place even now. Sumptuary laws controlling clothing. Now, let's move from the halls of Parliament to the streets of medieval England. Imagine walking through a medieval town. What would you notice about the people around you? Beyond the sights and sounds, you'd likely be struck by something else: how people were dressed. Because in medieval England, clothing wasn't just a matter of personal taste, it was a legal declaration of your social standing. Sumptuary laws, as they were known, meticulously dictated what you could wear based on your position in society. These laws created a rigid visual hierarchy, instantly communicating your place in the medieval world. At the base of this hierarchy were the peasants, the vast majority of the population. Their clothing was defined by practicality and necessity. Think rough, functional garments made from readily available materials like wool and linen. Simple tunics, plain dresses, and practical head coverings in muted earthy colors were the norm. These restrictions were deliberate, designed to visually distinguish the peasant class from everyone else. Moving slightly up the social ladder, we find merchants and skilled artisans. Reflecting their growing economic importance, they enjoyed a bit more leeway in their attire. They might afford slightly finer fabrics and perhaps a touch of color. However, sumptuary laws still prevented them from blurring the lines with the nobility. The gentry and lesser nobility possessed significantly greater freedom. Finer fabrics and even some imported materials became accessible. They could experiment more with colors and evolving styles. Their clothing started to become more tailored, visually reflecting their elevated social standing. And at the very apex of society stood the nobility and the royal family. For them, sumptuary laws were almost non-existent. They had near complete freedom to indulge in the most luxurious fabrics imaginable. Their clothing served as a blatant display of wealth and power, designed to inspire awe and reinforce their authority. These sumptuary laws weren't simply about social order, though that was their primary function. They also served as tools of economic policy, moral regulation, and even religious control. Economically, they aimed to protect domestic industries by limiting the market for expensive foreign imports and promoting local cloth production. Morally, they were intended to curb perceived excess and maintain social stability. In some towns and cities, specialized officials, almost like the fashion police, were appointed to enforce these dress regulations. They patrolled public spaces like markets and churches, looking for anyone daring to dress above their station. Punishments for violations could range from fines to confiscation of the offending garments. Women in particular were often targeted, reflecting anxieties about social mobility and perceived threats to the established hierarchy. So here are some examples of these restrictions. Purple dye was often reserved exclusively for royalty. Luxurious furs like ermine and vair were restricted to the highest ranks of nobility. In some regions, even colors like blue and green were limited for use by the lower classes during certain periods. The 1530 Imperial Police Ordinance in Germany provides a striking example, listing the precise colors and materials permitted for each social class. These laws extended beyond just fabrics and colors. Accessories, jewelry, and even the length of shoes could be subject to regulation. Every detail of attire could potentially signify social status and be subject to legal oversight. Interestingly, some loopholes existed. In places like Bologna, individuals could sometimes pay for legal exemptions, allowing them to wear otherwise forbidden clothing. In Florence, fines for violating dress codes effectively functioned as a tax on the wealthy. However, as the Florentine chronicler Giovanni Villani noted in 1330, even these strict laws had their limits. Despite the restrictions, people still sought out luxurious foreign fabrics, highlighting the challenges of controlling consumption through legislation. While sumptuary laws were not always perfectly enforced, they served as a constant visual and legal reminder of one's place in medieval English society and the potential consequences of attempting to transgress those boundaries. Ban on long, pointed shoes. Now, we've talked about armor and general clothing regulations, but medieval fashion laws got really specific. Let's descend from head to toe and focus on shoes. Specifically, shoes that were ridiculously, outrageously pointy. We're not talking a subtle point, mind you. Imagine shoes with toes so elongated they had to be tied to your knees just to keep them out of the way. This wasn't just a fleeting fashion trend in medieval England. It became a phenomenon so extreme, it was actually outlawed. We're entering the era of the infamous Poulaines and their equally infamous ban in 1463. Imagine this scene. People attempting to navigate daily life in these absurdly long shoes. Imagine strolling through a muddy medieval street with toes dragging along the ground or tripping over your own footwear. Contemporary observers certainly noticed. Medieval moralists and commentators ridiculed the Poulaines trend, pointing out their impracticality. They argued these shoes made walking cumbersome, were a safety hazard, and generally just got in the way. Restrictions even emerged on wearing them in certain public spaces due to safety concerns. The 15th century chronicler Robert of Avesbury even recorded that some Poulaines were so excessively long they were likened to scorpions' tails or even the claws of the devil. But Poulaines hadn't always been objects of scorn. They actually originated as a reasonably stylish type of pointed shoe, popular across Europe. Like many fashion trends, however, Poulaines became subject to exaggeration. The points grew longer and longer and longer, becoming almost comically oversized. In some extreme cases, the sheer extravagance of Poulaines was even seen as hindering the war effort. Fashion, in this instance, perceived as a potential threat to society itself. So, why the ban in 1463? Several factors converged. Firstly, economics. Poulaines, especially the excessively long ones, were expensive. All that extra leather and specialized craftsmanship cost money. In a time of economic fluctuations, sumptuary laws were often employed to curb what was perceived as excessive spending and frivolous display. Long Poulaines became potent symbols of wealth and status, and authorities concerned about social unrest sought to discourage such overt displays of affluence. Beyond economics, there was a significant moral dimension. The church and vocal segments of society viewed these ridiculously elongated shoes as decadent, frivolous, and a symbol of moral excess. Chroniclers like Philippe de Mézières even linked Poulaines to broader societal decay, claiming they symbolized moral decline and contributed to England's struggles during the 100 Years' War. And finally, practicality played a role. These shoes were undeniably unwieldy. They were tripping hazards, could easily get caught on obstacles, and were certainly not conducive to practical activities like walking long distances or engaging in physical labor. They were, in essence, a safety hazard and a general public nuisance. Thus, in 1463, the English government, facing a confluence of economic, moral, and practical concerns, finally declared enough was enough. They banned Poulaines, or at least restricted them to a reasonable length. Historical records suggest the permitted length varied, with some sources indicating a maximum of 2 inches for commoners, while the nobility might be allowed up to a staggering 24 inches. Whether strictly enforced or not, the ban represented a victory for practicality, a victory for the moralists, and perhaps a victory for common sense. The reign of the truly ridiculous pointy shoe, for a time, was over. though as fashion history demonstrates, these trends often have a curious way of re-emerging. Because as we've seen, even seemingly frivolous things like clothing can become deeply intertwined with history, law, social order, and even political power. Fashion throughout history has been a battleground, a canvas for self-expression, and let's be honest, sometimes a source of considerable amusement. If you enjoyed this delve into medieval fashion laws, don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical explorations. And if you have a favorite bizarre historical law, share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one.